What are invasive alien species? Invasive species are living things that are in an ecosystem it is not naturally in, and disrupts said ecosystem. There are many ways an invasive alien species can enter an ecosystem, most prominently by human doing, like bringing them through other organisms. It is estimated that there are nearly 4,300 invasive species in the United States alone. Examples of invasive species include the red-berry juniper, which is very prominent in Texas, the salt cedar, which is prominent in the southwestern United States, and the yellow star thistle, pictured here, is prominent in California, which can cause cows to get sick if they eat it.
As defined, invasive species are non-native species that threaten ecosystems, habitats, or species. They have some invasive species have negative impact on the ecosystem, which costs many people and the government billions of dollars. And these changes have global consequences for well-being, including the wholesale loss of alteration of goods and services. For example, figures of the total cost of IAS in the US range from $131 billion to $128 billion annually. However, many effects of IAS on economic services are difficult to convert into monetary terms. To see the whole effect on these items, this must be included: costs and benefits, which is basically the number of people affected by the IAS, whether in a negative way or a positive way. For example, in agriculture, the yellow star thistle is a plant in California that is unpalatable to cows, and it costs the state of California about $7.65 million annually in lost livestock forage, and it costs the ranchers about $9.45 million out of pocket to control expenditures. For hydrological services, which is about walled, the salt cedar is a tree that lives along the southwestern USA, and it consumes more water than native trees, and it contains about 1.4 to 3.0 billion cubic meters of water each year. Since then, the U.S. loses about $26.3 million of water loss that could be used for irrigation, multiple drinking water, or hydropower. For water quality can also be affected by IAS species. It can be affected by erosion. IAS can influence erosion through multiple ways. Plant IAS can alter soil properties, root structure of plant. IAS can change the soil stabilization capacity, and vertebrate IAS can eat plant biomass, which can include roots, and which can increase erosion. Invasive species also affects the disease regulations. Many IAS can be hosts for diseases. For example, the invasion of dense stands of Latana in East Africa has provided a new habitat for testy fly, which carries sleeping sickness, and it can be harmful to many people and other animals.
There are three types of ecosystem services. The first is provisioning services. This is the impact of food, fiber, and fuel, which is important for communities and businesses. An example of this would be the bush-tailed possums, who increase profits for eco-friendly fur companies. The second service is regulating services, which includes pollination, erosion and flooding, and climate regulations that are normally naturally created from the environment itself. An example of this is the non-native honeybees that are found in America, and that are beneficial because they help the pollination of crops, and also the golden apple snail, which is helpful for environments because they increase water sanitation naturally by eating the algae. The last service is the cultural service, which is often observed through the communities as being beneficial to culture through tourism, education, history, etc., which is beneficial for a community. An example of this would be the profits that are brought into the Lake Tahoe community due to the tourism and water recreation offered on the lake.
How to control invasive species.
it is usually easier to prevent an invasion of invasive species than it is to control it. It is valuable to make credible predictions about which species will impact ecosystem services and when these invasions will occur. You can do this by looking at previous invasions of certain species and comparing them to past years. Short-term experiments and models are often not valuable predictors of these invasions, while monitoring impacts in the long term and intensive studies on impacts on ecosystems might be the best approach. Also, the use of ecosystem service framework can be extremely beneficial to the controlling of invasive species and the prevention of any further invasions.
In conclusion, invasive species are found all over the world. Pictured here are 3 of the dozens of invasive species found in Kentucky. Moving forward, we have limited options. It is much harder to control an invasive species that is already here than it is to prevent them from coming in the first place. The best solution we have as of right now is to carefully track and predict invasive species. As I said before, it's extremely hard to control species that are already invasive, so a better option would just be to prevent future invasive species from causing more damage. The main message of this is to understand every side of invasive species and how they affect the environment. They cannot be labeled as entirely good or bad, but it's important to see both sides. It's important to people because of the effects that it has on the environment. And we should care about this to understand the benefits and harm of invasive species and how they affect us and our environment. Some invasive species have benefits to the environment, but many cause more harm than good.